Welcome to the launch of the UK Independent Music Podcast. Over the next few weeks, this series will be looking at the best emerging and independent talent, showcasing lots of bands and songwriters. We will also be discussing the effect lockdown has had on the independent music scene, with many bands, artists and venues having to think outside the box to connect with their audience. Join us as we go on a journey of music and join the discussion.
Hello and welcome to our first show. Thank you for listening to our podcast. My name's Dan and we have some great tracks and discussions for you today. We will have tracks from Tino Kane, Bill Evets, Wheel and George Hughes. This week we'll also discuss our first gigs, new music we've been listening to and talk about lockdown for bands. Before we get started, I think it's best if we all introduce ourselves. So let's start with Lewis. Welcome to the podcast, Lewis.
Hello podcast world, I'm Lewis, massive music fan, that's why we're all here. I've got an eclectic taste in music, dating back to some soul, Motown, dance music, but usually all roads lead to guitar, whether that's small independent indie bands or the huge bands of the past and the present that we all love. I'm sure we'll go on to talk about most of them throughout the course of this series. And in terms of gigs, it's exactly the same. If it's small, sweaty, you've got sweat dripping off you in a tiny venue, or if you're at one of the biggest festivals on the planet with your arms around your mates on a Sunday afternoon or a Saturday night, swigging pints, I'm there, or I want to be there. So yeah, we'll get on to later some of our favourite gigs, some of our first gigs, but we're here to discuss all avenues of music.
Thank you for that introduction, Lewis. What about you, James? Can you tell us a bit about you?
Well, the hell do I follow that up? Well, I'm very much like Duckers. I'm your standard Manchester indie kid, you know, raised wearing Adidas classics and jeans with rips in and all the rest of it. But no, going down to gigs, you know, ever since I was old enough to be allowed out, and you know, nipping down little local venues around Manchester and stuff, and getting a bit sweaty and full of beer, and just live for the atmosphere of going to gigs. Like same with Duckers, like, you know, into kind of stuff like Oasis and that kind of stuff. Also getting into kind of unknown, unsigned stuff, like you can go to a gig and, you know, you'd be going to see maybe a main act who might have been like front page of NME, but then you'll see some little support acts who you think, wow, you'll just hear a tune, you think, Jesus, what is that? That's mint. And then, like, you know, sort of music where it sticks in your mind, but then that band might still not make it, but in your head you're thinking, like, that is still to this day, like, you know, at the age of 30 something, we're not going to go into that, you know, you kind of, that kind of music sort of, you know, it sort of sticks in your mind. I mean, I do like a bit of other stuff as well, a bit of Motown and all that kind of stuff, but for me, yeah, indie all the way. And like, you know, like Duckers has said, it's kind of, we're here to kind of support little local, you know, sort of talent that, you know, that we're all sort of been passionate about ever since we've kind of been old enough to go to gigs and that kind of thing. So yeah, there we go.
Well, my name's Dan. I'm quite open when it comes to my music taste. I've got a varied taste, really. So my favourite bands are Bauer, Three Doors Down. I like Travis, and maybe some upcoming bands I like, in particular one called Fuzzy Sun. I think they've got some great tracks, and they're a little bit like Blossoms, which too are a great band. What I love about music is that you can play it to zone out. You can play it with your friends, your family, and whenever you're playing or wherever you go, you're always coming across new tracks that you enjoy and you want to find out more about that band or recording artist. Our first track is from Manchester-based singer-songwriter Tino Kane. He has been pressing his fans and critics alike since the release of his single Don't Hide in 2019. The track featured none other than Twisted Wheel's Johnny Brown. The title of this next track is Time Would See Me Right.
I knew time would see me right. You catch me when I'm falling, and time would see me right. 'Cause you're the angel I've been calling. 'Cause you're the angel I've been calling. I knew time would see me right. You catch me when I'm falling, and time would see me right. 'Cause you're the angel I've been calling. 'Cause you're the angel I've been calling. And I know you love me, 'cause I know the way you feel. 'Cause I feel the same way too.
So one of the aims of this podcast is to promote and talk about new bands and recording artists. So what we're going to do every podcast, the three of us are going to mention any bands or tracks that we've heard, and we want to give a big shout out to them. So Lewis, do you want to start us off?
So new music I've been listening to. There's a band from Doncaster called the Outcharms. And I must admit, they came on a recommendation from our man James. But they got this track and it's called Can You Keep Up With The Act? And it's so early Arctic Monkeys. I mean, like I say, they're from Donny. And obviously the Arctic's from Sheffield. But it's like Alex Turner circa 06. Unbelievable tune. And it's almost like the verses are very similar to Brainstorm. That real naughty, dirty Arctics vibe on it. And it's a brilliant record. They've got about 12 tracks up on Apple Music, so I got stuck into the rest of them. And there's some really good tunes on there. Check them out, the Outcharms. Second up is a band called the Scuttlers, who hopefully we're going to talk about again later in this series. And they're from Middleton, so it's our neck of the woods. And they've done a track called Leaders of the Lost Generation. And again, brilliant tune. I love the na 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 at the end. It's almost like Oasis, all around the world vibes. Brilliant track. And then thirdly, I'd like to mention Richard Archer, who 15 years ago now released The Stars of CCTV with Hard-Fi, one of the best debut albums of the noughties for me, right up there. And Hard-Fi were around for maybe 5, 6, 7 years, and then they just disappeared off the face of the earth, never to be seen again until now. Richard Archer is back, and he's back with a small project, and it's called Off-World. So he's teamed up with, I think it was the bass player from Amy Winehouse's band, the drummer from Joe Strummer's band, not The Clash when he was solo though, I must admit, and then a singer from the States, from Philadelphia, a soul singer. And on their last record, Hard-Fi did a song called Fire in the House, and it always struck me how Richard Archer's voice and the voice of the backing singer blended perfectly, and I always thought they should have done maybe a little bit more of that. Well, they've done this project, they've done an EP, and I think there's 3 or 4 songs on there, but this is like a continuation of that. Their voices blend perfectly, and there's some old Hard-Fi elements in there, very sort of street sound, very present sound though as well. It's tackling a lot of issues. The lead single was called Brave to Be Alive, and you think about what's gone down in the world in the last 3, 4, 5 months. It's apt. And it's so good to have Richard Archer back making music.
Over the past week, while I've been off, I've been listening to quite a few new bands and artists. There are some great tracks out there, and the 3 bands I'm going to talk about mention today are The Delights, Springfield, and a young lad called George Hughes. The Delights are a Manchester band who sound a bit like Fuzzy Sun and the Blossoms. Their music is a blend of dream pop with hints of classic indie rock. My favourite track of theirs is Loverboy. Springfield are an alternative rock band from the Lake District, and the first song I heard from theirs was called Licorice, which I think is a great summer track. And the last one I'm going to talk about is a young lad called George Hughes. The 18-year-old from Leeds has only just started out during lockdown. He sent me his track last week, titled Will I Ever Love Again, and I think it's brilliant. We will play that track later on.
I was listening to the Outcharms, obviously give that recommendation to Duckers there. I think they're phenomenal as well. But then like sort of other sort of bands of note that I've been listening to this week is one called The Crux. One particular song I really liked was called In Time. It's very much kind of it's quite a big sound really. Sort of does have sort of little elements of, you can almost hear kind of Oasis kind of influences in there, but it's got a really good sort of good beat to it and stuff, and like got nice sort of guitars over the top of it and everything. It just has a really good sound to it. The other band I've kind of been listening to, which are kind of they're quite big, well not huge. They're called the Snuts, and one of the songs I was going to listen to was Maybe California. It's kind of like almost sort of Beach Boysy kind of vibe, kind of very kind of happy, kind of good for the summer. Not so much at the minute with the weather we're having, but like, you know, I can imagine a nice sunny day, sat in the garden or hopefully on a beach at some point. You know, it'd be the kind of tune you'd like to have, you know, there with maybe a pina colada while you sat around the pool, maybe. And then
I love some of the early Beach Boys stuff. I'm gonna have to listen to that.
Yeah. And another band I've been listening to is the Royston Club. One of the songs is like "Built Can't Believe It or Not," and it's quite a warm sound, kind of indie. I was kind of brought up on really. It's good tunes really. Yeah, I really rate them. But yeah, that's kind of my kind of that's my vibe this week basically. Yeah.
Our next track is from a band called The Lovettes. The Lovettes are a 4-piece indie rock band formed in the northwest of Cumbria back in 2018, inspired and influenced by artists such as Echo and the Bunnymen, The Cure, Blossoms and the Kooks. This is Can't You See by The Lovettes.
Tell about me, you're slowly making history today, or so you say. Oh, but all I see is your sweet color symphony. Oh, but can't you see that you just need the one for me? Oh, but can't you see that you just need the one for me? And the way you stare, you know I just don't really care. You know I just don't really care. Oh, no. Oh, girl, can't you see that you're just not the one for me? And the way you stare, you know I just don't really care. Oh girl, can't you see that you just not the one for me? And the way you stare, you know I just don't really care. Oh girl, can't you see that you just not the one for me? And the way you stare, you know I just don't really care. You know I just don't really care. You know I just don't really care. No.
Two years ago, I was homeless. Now I'm on tour with Liam Gallagher. Now that's some headline. And that was the headline that was doing the rounds sort of mid-February, just before lockdown. And it was about one of our own bands, one of Manchester's bands. Well, okay, Saddleworth's finest. Twisted Wheel. named after the iconic club in Manchester, the club where 60s legends, the Beatles, the Stones, the Kinks, all played while plying their trade on the way up. It was an apt name for a band that were sort of starting out on an underground journey via MySpace blogs, maybe 12 months after the back of Arctic Monkeys being one of the very first bands to do that. Underground demos, lots of noise. I remember lots of noise around this band, and we, the three of us, me, Dan, James, first went to see him maybe late 2007. I cannot remember the venue. Maybe one of them two will be able to help me out on that. But we went to see him, maybe about late 2007, early 2008. And we had this demo, and it had almost like, I think it was like a black vinyl. I can't quite picture it. I remember we all loved it anyway, this demo. And I reckon I've still got it somewhere. And we went to see him, and if you think about some of the tunes they had off that first album, You Stole the Sun, Lucy the Castle, You Dirty Rock and Roller, Bouncing Bomb, Strife. That album was almost like an instant classic, and it was up there for me at the time. You know, if you look back now and dissect it, Arctic Monkeys were an amazing band, and that first album for me, it's one of my favourite ever. But Twisted Wheel's debut album wasn't that far away from it. When you look at it and you compare it track for track, it wasn't actually that far away from it. And I then went on to see them at Heaton Park, where Oasis rolled into town, 70,000 people each night, over 3 nights. And the first night, the generator blew. I remember they had the Bank of Oasis, or was it the Bank of Burnage, £50 notes produced, didn't they, for the refund. So I'm sure there's still a few of them floating around somewhere. But that night, the bill was Oasis, Kasabian, The Enemy, and Twisted Wheel, playing to the largest gathering of people in Heaton Park since 1982, when 100,000 people turned up for the Pope. So that's not bad company to be in. They went on to support Paul Weller many times, including a duet at Silverstone of That's Entertainment. And they believed, I think it was the second album, they went over to LA to record. And I think it was with Dave Sardy, who'd produced Oasis. Although if I am wrong on that, then someone better tell me. But, you know, the band were really on the cusp of amazing things, and they achieved amazing things. You know, you think about that, it was a 2-year period. You know, they went from MySpace to Heaton Park, 70,000 people in 2 years. And then the second album came, and unfortunately it didn't do commercially quite as well as the debut album, and the band lost a little bit of steam, and eventually, I think it was maybe about 3 or 4 years later, they disbanded, and they became dark times. And especially for Johnny Brown, he's had some amazing highs early in his career, and you know, he'd tell you himself, and I've heard in many interviews, he had some incredible lows as well that followed. And then maybe about 3 years ago, 2017, I think the wheels were getting in motion again for the comeback. And again, almost sort of underground via Twitter. I think he was doing some pop-up acoustic gigs here and there. And we first went to see him, Johnny Brown, at the Band on the Wall. It was a Band on the Wall, and I think it was about December time, 2017, I think. And he did I remember him doing like Bouncing Bomb and all the old classics acoustic. And the crowd was really infectious and right behind him. And he went off for like an interval and came back out with a couple of lads. They weren't the original lineup, but under the banner of Twisted Wheel, and they played a load of new songs. And they were absolutely fantastic, you know, and that really set the motion of the comeback. Fast forward to February this year, and I bumped into Johnny in the foyer of the Sago Forum in Milan, and that's where the headline at the top of this feature came from. 2 years ago I was homeless, now I'm on tour with Liam Gallagher, and that's where they were. They were supporting Liam Gallagher. I think it was February the 16th in Milan, a Sago Forum, sold out. Liam's in the middle of his European tour, Twisted Wheel, had a support act for every night, taking in cities such as Munich, Amsterdam, Paris, back in the big time. And they were just about to release the first album and the first music in a number of years. I think it was 7, but again, correct me if I'm wrong on that. And, you know, the comeback was complete, because that night in Milan, there were a load of Brits there. I remember talking to people from Preston, Yorkshire, a couple of Cockneys, but all the Italians were behind this band because they remember them from 2009, because the infamous night in Paris, the night that Oasis split up, they didn't even get out on stage that night. Twisted Wheel did, but Oasis didn't. The very next night they were supposed to go out to Milan, so a lot of Italians had tickets obviously to see Oasis, but they remember this small name at the bottom of the ticket, one of the support acts, Twisted Wheel, and it stuck with them. I remember watching them that night, and the buzz in the room, there were people behind me talking, and they were like, Twisted Wheel, 2009 Oasis, and it was amazing. The atmosphere was dynamite. It was electric. There was such a feeling of love in that room. And I remember sort of in the days after, a couple of the guys from the band on social media were like, that was the gig of our lives. It was just something else. It really was. And then fast forward a few weeks, album release, and I think it was like the second week of lockdown. So the timing, you know, it couldn't have been much worse really, could it, when you're trying to get out and build a little bit of publicity around the album. I'm sure they had a cancelled TV appearance on Soccer AM, which obviously would have really, you know, gained some followers that had maybe forgotten about them all those years ago. So they've had to do it the hard way again, and this band have always had to do it the hard way. And you know something? I really, really admire the fact that they stuck with the guns. They know that they invested a lot of love and a lot of time into making this album, and it was theirs, and they wanted to get it out there. There's bigger artists who have rescheduled album release dates during lockdown, maybe put out an extra single and said, oh, we'll do the album in 3 months. Twisted Wheel stuck to the guns, and you've got to admire them for that. It shows balls. And it was a tough thing to do, really, when you think they weren't going to get that much publicity during album release week. But for those first few weeks of lockdown, everybody was obviously self-contained at home, unfortunately, if you'd been furloughed or working from home. And I remember like the Saturday nights, and you couldn't really do anything at all. And sat in the kitchen, a few beers deep, and just throwing myself into that album was one of the pleasures that I got from the first few weeks of lockdown. Nomad hat, straight out the traps, instant, in your face, rock and roll. What a tune, and what an opener to an album, and a mission statement. It's instant, it grabs you. DNA, heart-wrenching lyrics. A real a real story, and a lot of emotion in that song. And then the second half of the album, where things got maybe a little bit more experimental. Satisfying the Ritual, the great title for an album, by the way, but the title track, almost a little bit hip hop, delving into little snippets of 90s hip hop layers on there. And then the final track, which was almost like, that was something that I'd never seen from Twisted Wheel. It was called Show Me, and it had this beautiful piano outro, and there was almost snippets of Cohen meets Bowie in there, and a tenderness, and very much a song that felt like it was looking back at what had been and what could still happen, and how far maybe someone had come on the journey. And it was a beautiful, beautiful song, and an unexpected song to close the album. So, Twisted Wheel, Saddleworth's finest. If you haven't already, stream the album, download the album, buy the album. Just make sure you listen to it and support one of Manchester's finest bands of the last 12 years that maybe haven't received the credit universally that they deserve. Twisted Wheel.
If you would like to be featured on the podcast with your tracks or an interview, please contact us at independentukpodcast@gmail.com. On this episode of the podcast, we're going to talk about our first gigs. Between the three of us, we've been to quite a few gigs, and we're going to talk about our favourite ones and our first gig. My first gig was when I was 18. We went to watch a band play called Bauer. I think it was at Academy Unsigned. I remember finding them on MySpace and showing my lads a song called Connected, which if you haven't heard it, you should. It's on Spotify. I've seen some great gigs, and small ones especially, like with Fuzzy Sun in the Soup Kitchen, and at the Manchester Arena I've seen bands like Razorlight and Metallica play. Metallica was phenomenal and a great experience. Small gigs I find are the best though, because I think they've got better atmosphere and they're more enjoyable. For example, 6 years ago, I think around that time, I went to watch Fozzy play at one of the small academies, and Chris Jericho is a huge wrestling star, the lead singer, and I just felt the atmosphere coming off him with the crowd was phenomenal. So what about you two? What were your first gigs?
Well, my actual first gig would have been Embrace at the Manchester Apollo in I think it was February 2005. For me, it was like a real sort of baptism of kind of beer and sweat. It was madness, really. Kind of not like the most sort of heavy going band kind of thing, but for me, like it was part of their sort of Out of Nothing tour, and like I don't know, it was that thing of when you first sort of walk into a venue, it's kind of, you have that sort of sense of stale beer and kind of like tension, and then you start hearing them tuning up, and you can hear the bass and stuff, and like, and then you just sort of taken with it, and then obviously support acts come on, and like it's that thing of that taste of like beer and the music, and kind of you get taken in by it. And obviously at the time I was very young, and you're there at the front, and yeah, you just sort of, it's just something about that being in a venue like that. And then I think not long after that, I think my second gig would have been Feeder at the same venue, the Apollo again. Like I'd been listening to Feeder for years before then, and kind of same kind of thing, but obviously I got the drill a bit more by then, and kind of and then I'm moving on from there. It was kind of a lot of the gigs then was spent mainly kind of Manchester Academy way, and I think I went to see a band called Morning Runner at the Roadhouse. That was my first taste of a real tiny little venue. Like it's not there anymore now. It's on Newton Street in back of Piccadilly, and kind of sort of moving in between sort of venues of like that and the Night and Day Cafe, Academy 1, Academy 2, Academy 3, and then eventually what became like the club academy underneath. So I kind of moved between like bands. Like went to see a band called The Others quite a few times. They were quite sort of dirty punk kind of sound. They were very much kind of like sort of, yeah, very sort of punky. And they had a band called The Unstrung supporting them once, and they never really made it, but they were kind of in that form of like the Libertines and that kind of thing, and like very much kind of proper Cockney kind of indie rock. And then obviously moving on, went into sort of watching big gigs like Oasis at the City of Manchester Stadium in 2005 as well. So it's quite a big year. That year, 2005, was like a real baptism of beer and music, and kind of got me hooked, really, you know. And to this day, there's still nothing better than going into a gig venue, and when you're into a band, and you know, sometimes it's not even about the main act, it's about the support acts and finding new stuff, and you know, getting that real sort of passion for the music. But yeah, what about you, Duckers?
So my first gig was way back in 2002. I was still in school, and it was the mighty Richard Ashcroft supporting the mighty at Oasis. And I remember getting a Met into town with my cousin and his mate, and getting off and just walking around near Old Trafford Cricket Club, around like the Matt Busby Way, and the first thing that hit me was the sheer size of the stage. And I was like, yes, this is where I want to be, in front of a stage like that, listening to bands play great tunes. And I remember Richard Ashcroft was probably second solo album, not long split up with the Verve, and he played a stormer of a set, really good set, and what a reception he got just as a support artist, you know. And Oasis came out, they were still playing Hello, which is one of the really underrated tunes off What's the Story Morning Glory for me. So it was a really sort of nice time to see him, because they had all the classics obviously off the first two albums, but stuff that later got shelved in the live set, from Be Here Now, Standing on the Shoulder of Giants, and of course they were on the Heathen Chemistry tour, that was sort of still around. So them little gems like Hello and like Stand By Me off Be Here Now and things like that. So it was a really strong set, brilliant. And I just remember seeing Liam on that stage and thinking, yes, that is a bit of me right there. And that set a precedent for every gig I've ever been to since. And I was lucky enough to go back to Old Trafford Cricket Club 2018 and see Richard Ashcroft support Liam. So all those years later, it was almost like a repeat of my first gig. So it was a nice experience.
The next track on our podcast is by a young 18-year-old lad called George Hughes, and it's called Will I Ever Love Again?
Too early for my own good. I didn't know where to stand, and I don't know where I stood. Your friends were telling me things, were they just lies? Didn't know what to do, so I read between those lines. An easy mistake to make, a misconception. You clearly wasn't ready, no time to perfection. Will I ever love again? Will I ever love again? Rumors spreading around the day before. Butterflies in my stomach, just something to ignore. Walking home again, what am I doing wrong? We're going around in circles, it's been going on far too long. Same old story, but a different day. I've heard it all before, got my feelings fly away. Please forgive me I'm not sure, I've never felt this way about you before. Please forgive me, I'm not sure, I've never felt this way about you before. Will I ever love again? Will I ever love again? Will I ever love again? Will I ever love again?
During lockdown, bands and recording artists have been limited to what they can do without gigs, but I've seen some great lockdown specials on social media. The Blossoms have done some amazing videos on YouTube, and Fuzzy Son even created a music video and asked fans to submit clips in which my 5-month-old son is in. There's also been some great special festivals take place on YouTube and Twitter, and I think the creativity of bands and people behind putting this together has been amazing. What have you guys seen from this lockdown? So James, have you seen anything interesting over lockdown?
There's a band I know of called The Notion. Guy called Cal McComb that I know quite well. He's been doing a few sort of Friday night sets on his Instagram on it's sort of in his back garden. That's kind of acoustic stuff and a few covers, a few of his own sort of songs as well. It's been good to see. It's a good way of sort of lifting people's sort of spirits. If you think Friday night, normally you'd get to the point where you're like, right, that's it, working week's done, let's get down the pub, or down to some gig venues or whatever. And obviously you can't do that. But like, if there's anything during these, unprecedented, call them dark if you want, times, it's been good to see bands like, that we know. And to some extent, there's bands that always be there on sort of Spotify and YouTube and all that kind of stuff. But it's almost like during these times, like where they would normally play to maybe 100, 200 people max at a gig, now potentially they're like sort of gig venues are now infinite. There could be more than that listening. It's been quite a good thing to some extent because it has given people that opportunity. And like if people are saying, "Oh well, I'm listening to these and sharing it and that kind of thing," then that's good as well. But it does sort of bring people together, even though they're sort of far apart. But it's nice to just be able to kind of still maintain that kind of sort of life of live music and being social, and because that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's a very social outlet, being into this kind of music. But that's the Notion. They're really good, obviously. As well known as they are, I know that Liam Frey, the Cortinas, has been doing a few bits on Friday nights as well. But yeah, they're the main ones I've been kind of sort of listening to. But yeah, what about yourself, Duckers?
Yeah, so I've seen the Blossoms stuff on YouTube, and they did a duet with Liam Frey and one with Miles Kane, and they were great, really good. And also the Blossoms did a cover of Paperback Writer. But I'm going to talk about two that have stood out for me that I've seen on social media since lockdown. And that's Elbow. They've been doing this thing called Elbow Rooms, and I think it's most Fridays they've been putting a weekly segment out since lockdown. And the way they're doing it is, it's almost like they're on a Zoom call. You can see them all in their individual houses, obviously guys singing and the band recording their bits, but it's so smooth. They could be on stage at the Apollo. And there was one track that they did, and it's called Great Expectations. And I think it was on the second album, Leaders of the Free World, around 2005. And that track has become a cult track for Elbow. And it was about a marriage on the last bus home. And we all know that Guy Garvey is a northern poet laude. So I'm just going to read you a segment of the lyrics. A call girl with yesterday's eyes was our witness and priest. Stockport Supporters Club kindly lent us our choir. Your vow was your smile as we moved down the aisle on the last bus home. And that bus is a 135 that runs from Bury to Manchester. So for us, you know, it's very sort of local and you can relate to it. And then late night bus journeys home from Manchester. So that stuck with me. The second one I'm going to talk about is Oasis's second drummer, Alan White. And let's have it right, Oasis's best drummer, Alan White. So he joined on the What's the Story Morning Glory album and he stuck around for about 8 years. And since leaving the band in 2004, he's just never been seen since. And since lockdown, he's created an Instagram account and he's got himself on that drum kit, drumming away to all the Stone Cold classics that he played on. And he's a dynamite drummer. So he's been putting snippets up of Back in Anger, Wonderwall, some might say. So check him out. Alan White on YouTube, not on YouTube, on Instagram.
Lockdown has had a massive effect on venues around the United Kingdom, including Band of a Wall in Manchester, which is a not-for-profit venue. They're seeking any donations they can get. Hashtag Save Our Venues is trying to let people know what venues need help and how you can donate. Give it a search and see if you can help. So the track we're ending the podcast on is a band called Wheel. Wheel was formed in 2015 and after several years of writing and recording and gigging, they went away to emerge again in 2019. They're now back with a song called Summertime and it's their new single and it's a belter. Thank you for listening to the Independent UK Music Podcast and we will be back here in 2 weeks. Stay safe.
Never felt so good.